Hello and welcome to the AVForums podcast for Monday the 28th of August. Yes, August is just about over and done with, and happy bank holiday. Joining me in this edition, our assistant editor, Steve Withers.
Did you call moi a dipshit?
Daily audio reviewer, Ed Selley.
Your foster parents are dead.
And special guest, Mark Botwright.
Why do you cry?
Welcome
Because
back.
I'm here recording this podcast, Mark.
Yeah, and he's sober, and he has been for a long time now, haven't you, Ed?
Does the world look strange to you?
I don't know. I mean, it goes back to that classic line from someone who I believe died of cirrhosis of the liver. That the thing is, you know, waking up and that's the best you're going to feel all day. That's just the depressing part of it, but not more depressing than tying a couple on, falling over on my crutches, and continuing this sad charade of not actually being a functional adult. So I'm tolerating it. I'm good.
And the leg's fine.
Yeah, making progress. To be fair, it got most of the rotational movement back, and hopefully, come my next hospital appointment, they're going to say I can start putting some weight on it. So we'll see where we go.
Good stuff. While you're going to be sat down in front of the TV, you'll be pleased to know that Air Crash Investigation's back in September.
About damn time.
It is, isn't it? I mean, last season was really quite disappointing, if I'm honest.
Distinct lack of crashes, were there?
Well, no, they actually, because of legal precedents and cases and stuff, they had to go back and redo some of the episodes that they'd done previously. So one of them was the
Tenerife.
The Tenerife 2 747s, which I've seen about 3 different versions of that now. But because of legal things, they have to go back and update them and correct them. So last season, it was more like the admin season, wasn't it, really?
Yeah, although the episode where fundamentally it came down to the fact that a light plane airliner crashed because the pilot was an angry, impatient twat. That always makes you feel so much better about commercial air travel. But, I mean, there's always good episodes and bad episodes, but I'm hoping that it's an interesting spread of some of the more interesting historical ones. Regrettably, planes have, after a period of not crashing very much at all, have started falling out of the sky quite a lot more. So it's not like they've got any shortage of content. Yep. So we'll see where we go.
Yeah, I mean, the thing with Air Crash Investigation, and if you are a subscriber to Discovery and National Geographic and all those channels, is that, you know, Air Crash Investigation, I must have seen every episode ever made about 3 or 4 times now. The same as I've seen probably every Top Gear episode about 6 or 7 times, thanks to Dave, or even more. And episodes of Wheeler Dealers on Turbo and Fast and Loud and all that. So when you look at these series, I've probably seen each episode about 7 or 8 times, just because of the repeated nature. So when you get a new season coming along, it's great to watch. It's a big deal. It's great to watch new content that you're probably going to watch another 4 or 5 times on repeat.
Yeah, when you start talking about TV programs, not only do you talk about TV programs I've never heard of, you talk about channels I've never heard of. I mean, what's Turbo?
Discovery Turbo.
It's part of the Discovery suite of channels. It's along there with Discovery Shed as well.
Yeah. I bet there's some good stuff on Discovery Shed, like the guy that makes tree houses. That's interesting. It's almost as good as Forged in Fire, that one, with the tree house built.
Can I just ask?
Be careful.
Can I just ask, Phil, how big is the pile of unwatched Blu-rays that you've got at the moment?
Yeah, it's taller than me, but then I'm not very tall, so I keep getting told. Yeah, it's taller than me. But you see, I've got to go into the other room and switch the projector on and make, you know, put the thing over the window to make it completely blacked out, and it's just a hassle.
I've got a pile of unplayed records for the first time in my life. Because it's simply too much effort to operate a record player at the moment, and they keep coming in.
Well, we're going to come back to this a bit later on in the podcast, so we'll save it for that. But we're going to be talking about LaserDisc later on, because it's one of those formats that probably kicked it off for most film fans. And me and Steve were talking about this, last week, and the fact that you had to get up and go over and turn it over, much the same as vinyl, in the middle of a film. Nowadays you think back to it, it sounds weird, but we're going to crack on. We'll come on to that subject a little bit later on. So Mark, why don't you tell us all about the fantastic competitions that we've been mentioning for weeks now that you can still win?
All right, we've still got the Scan Cedia S1 Nero luxury gaming chair, and that one runs till the 30th of August, so only a few days left. Also, closing on the same day, we've got the Xerotech Dobby Mini Selfie Quadcopter, courtesy of GearBest. We've got new competitions for a copy of Batman and Harley Quinn on Blu-ray. That one runs till 4th of September. We've also got The Hunter's Prayer on DVD, and that one also.
If you're feeling retro.
Yeah, exactly. That one also runs till 4th September, and we've got a pair of Nadviso HP30 headphones, courtesy of Seven Oaks Sound and Vision. That one's a little bit longer. You've got till the 20th of September for that.
Nice pair of Nads there. Any previous competition winners?
None.
He's won again, that none.
Yeah.
He's a lucky
prolific,
bastard, isn't
Yeah, absolutely. Right, so let's move on to hardware news. And Nakamichi, I always wanted a cassette deck. You
say Nakamichi to me, I think cassette deck.
Well, and
exactly.
rightly so.
Yeah.
Or the Dragon turntable.
Yeah, no, it wasn't the turntable. It was definitely the tape decks. And my best mate.
Well, no, but there was a Dragon turntable as well, and it's a fearsome piece of equipment.
Okay.
Really impressive.
Yeah, means nothing to me, Ed, though.
But in the 80s, you lusted after a Nakamichi cassette deck.
Yeah, that's what I'm getting at. Yeah, you absolutely lusted after. And my best mate managed to pick one up a few years back, and it is a thing of beauty. It really is. Even though cassette decks are no longer the thing, it's a bit like the SL12. 1210 or 1200. It's one of those bits of kit that you lusted after because you just couldn't afford one at the time that they were popular.
Was this the giant one with about kind of 50 dials on the front?
The Dragon has probably the most controls on the front panel of any home audio product ever made, but they weren't all like that. They essentially there was sort of stuff that was borderline pro, like the Dragon, but then there were also sort of slicker versions. There's one in the film 9.5 Weeks, which had the ability to pop the tray out and then rotate the cassette by a sort of sprung-loaded compressed air mechanism that lasted about 6 minutes, but it looked incredibly cool for the 6 minutes it worked.
Yeah, I mean,
you're the only person that I know who'd watch 9.5 Weeks for that.
It's a bit like old audio equipment where it was down to the build quality at the end of the day. These things were built like absolute tanks. I mean, the materials used, the mechanisms for like Ed was saying, for opening the tray to put your cassette into and all the rest. I mean, they were absolutely fantastic build quality, and I believe they were the first to have Dolby noise reduction on them as well.
Pretty much. Tayak, I think, launched something at the same time. But yeah, they were in the first tranche of people to get Dobley.
I also think that Nakamichi Dragon might be the coolest name for a product ever. It just sounds great.
It's we need to get back to that, don't we? Because we're getting sick of this B7 and 700ZLX
just start giving them names.
And these blinking things on the end of model numbers where it's XJ70. It's all just for shipping information. Why include it in the model name? We need to get back to things like I don't know, the Sony Axe or
well, Sony's code names for their products and could be quite cool. The VW1000, their first 4K projector, was codenamed Valkyrie.
Yeah.
They should have just called it the Sony Valkyrie. That's
and then you had the Ruby, didn't you, as well?
Yeah, the Ruby was before that. The VW100 was the Ruby.
Yeah.
The Sony Valkyrie. I would have bought it on the name alone.
Who was it that had the gold tape deck? Was that a Nakamichi? There was a famous, a large gold one.
That's probably the Pioneer CT1000.
No, I think you're right. Actually, it was the 10002 XL from Nakamichi, and it was gold.
It had handles on it.
Yeah, huge handles at the side. It was a 19-inch rack. That was used professionally, but they also used to do it with a wooden case with a 19-inch rack player in there, in gold, and it had a big limited thing, and it actually had sliders, almost like mixing desk sliders for microphones and stuff like that on it.
If you are listening to this and you're under the age of 30, I'm sorry.
To the Defunct Formats podcast.
Although that said, if we're doing stupid names, Phil, and it takes. Have you seen what Audi has announced for their new naming policies, where the cars now have this numeric value which pertains to their kilowatt output?
Okay.
And I'm not making any of this up. So you get the A455, which is 55 kilowatts or 200 horsepower, and it's just the most arbitrary, and it's like Numberwang, but with cars.
But it's German, Ed.
Bonkers.
You're talking about Germans. This is what they do: sausages and numbers and strange things.
Although, as Sniff Petrol pointed out yesterday, this does mean that if you take other car manufacturers to be using the Audi system, that means the Saab 9000 has 32,000 brake horsepower.
I do hope they call their naming system Audi Wang.
Audi Wang. No, that's what you call people that drive them. Right, Nakamichi. Nakamichi.
So, what were we talking about?
Yeah, Nakamichi. We were going to go into soundbars for some strange reason. We got sidetracked. No, Nakamichi, they were famous for the tape decks, as we have demonstrated from about 30 years ago. But they are now back on the market with DTS-X compatible soundbars, Steve.
Yeah, I've got to admit, I didn't even know Nakamichi was still going. But we got this press release this week. They've announced 2 DTS-X compatible soundbars, a 9.2 and a 7.2 model. Now, I don't know about you, Phil, but I've read this press release a few times now, and I'm not 100% sure exactly what these things are meant to do, because it doesn't mention anywhere, as far as I could see, anything about upward-firing drivers. It just says immersive experience, DTS-X, 9.2, 7.2. Exactly how they're delivering this. I know I think it's got wireless rear speakers, but other than that, exactly how it's being delivered is vague, to say the least. We will be getting them in for review, so we'll find out for ourselves. But I've got to say, my first thought reading this was, what's the point? It doesn't support Dolby Atmos. Most of the discs, most of the immersive audio discs have Dolby Atmos soundtracks. So if you're going to do a soundbar, you've got to have that.
Yeah,
and then DTS-X is a nice addition. Just doing DTS-X seems a bit...
But if you look at the other flip of the coin, Steve, all the current soundbars that are out, even the immersive ones and ones that aren't immersive, like we're going to come on to the MS650 from Samsung that I've just reviewed, they don't have DTS.
No. So what you suggesting, you have 2 soundbars.
So yes, I mean, you've got Nakamichi coming out with DTS-X, and we don't know if it does anything else other than that. I'm assuming it'll handle PCM, because I think they all have to handle PCM. But at the minute you've got soundbars that don't do DTS, or they do DTS 2-channel, like the Samsung I've just reviewed, or they don't have any capabilities in them. The cheaper ones don't have any. You just plug it into your TV. But the ones that do have processing on board, they're all Dolby only at the minute, or with DTS 2-channel. And when you think that the vast majority of Blu-rays out there, and that's the vast majority of content that people are likely to be watching on the disc players, are DTS only, then if they've got a soundbar, they're not getting the full experience out of that.
No, that is true. And obviously, since it supports DTS-X, it will support DTS HD Master Audio as well. So that is good news if you have a large Blu-ray collection. I just found the press release was misleading in one respect, because it says world's first DTS-X soundbar. That's not true, because the Yamaha YSP-5600 is the only soundbar that supports both Dolby Atmos and DTS-X. Unfortunately, it doesn't pass HDR, and it's only got one HDCP 2.2 HDMI input. But that minor point aside, it does do both formats. Yeah, I just found the press release wording vague, but in the same way that DTS-X itself is very vague about what it does, isn't it? I mean, yes, you can run it in an Atmos style, say 5.1.4 setup, but they sort of will say, oh, we can deliver an immersive audio experience from 2 channels, So I'll be really interested to see what actually turns up and how it actually works, because as I said, the way it's delivering this immersive experience is very vague in the press release.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what they're like, because soundbars, we've discussed it for quite a bit this year. Actually, we've done quite a few of the soundbars, the higher end stuff and the lower end stuff. It's the part of the market which it continues to grow, and it continues to be popular with some of our members, because for reasons best known to themselves, but usually because living spaces are so small and people want to get rid of speakers from rooms and all the rest of it. They're becoming more and more popular as people downsize as well, which is what we've discussed in the past. So it'll be interesting to see what these soundbars are like. You say they come with speakers at the back, which
seems to, according to the press release, there were these rear speakers as well that you can use.
Yeah, well, that we'd encourage that if they're wireless and truly wireless, and not like well, let's move on to the Samsung that I've just reviewed. So the HW-MS650, it's what they call a Sound Plus soundbar, which means it's an all-in-one soundbar. It doesn't come with a subwoofer because they reckon that the drivers, the 6 woofer drivers within the soundbar, work in such a way that it improves bass and it has a nice deep bass response that it doesn't need a subwoofer. So it's an all-in-one box solution. And that's it, that's what you buy. However, you can extend it using optional surround speakers. And they say wireless surround speakers, but you've actually reviewed the system with the speakers, Steve, in the past. They didn't send it with a soundbar, they just sent the soundbar. But what they actually mean is it comes with a module, and then you have to wire the speakers to the module. So they are actually wired at the back, it's just this module, and you've got to find a power socket for that as well. So it's not really the kind of solution that you first of all think of. What they basically means
you're not running wires from the front of the room to the back of the room.
Exactly.
In that sense. That's the bit that's wireless. But yes, there is but I guess any wireless speaker has to have a power source, so that's always going to be an issue. You've got to have at least one.
I mean, it'll be great as battery technology moves on, and it will move on with the current pushes towards electric cars and all the rest of it, and electric batteries for houses and that kind of thing. As battery technology improves and becomes better and better, I can see a time where you will have battery powered rear speakers. And
Philips did it, didn't they? They had a quite an interesting soundbar where it had well, sorry, that wasn't a soundbar, it was like a 4-channel system, but the front speakers, there was a slot in the top, and you took them off the top. The rear speakers were attached to the front speakers, and you took them off where they charged, and then you took them off and moved them to the back. So you had battery-powered genuinely wireless rear speakers, which I thought was quite an innovative idea, but it hasn't really caught on with anybody else. But
it's a bit like getting up. It's like getting up and changing the LaserDisc, though. It's you're going to have to charge these speakers, and then what happens if you forget and you leave them out, and you go back and I'm going to have to charge these, so you're not getting a surround experience that night.
That's always a problem with Active Shutter 3D, wasn't it, as well? Like, bollocks, haven't we charged the glasses?
So anyway, getting back to this soundbar, the MS650, I was pleased with it. Great performer. It worked really well with the Samsung TV that I've got here. I've got a KS9500, which is here as our test sample at the minute, for using with products like this. And I've got to say, it took a matter of minutes to get up and running and synced with the TV, so you could use the TV remote for the volume and all the rest of it. It's wireless, it's got Wi-Fi, it's got Bluetooth. There's a nice app that you can download, iOS or Android, which has Tidal and Spotify and all the other streaming services within that, so you just sign in the app, and then it streams the content to the soundbar, which I thought was a great touch, so you're not having to Bluetooth and then go to another app and open up Tidal and then log into that and all the rest of it. You do it through the one app, which I thought was a nice solution to that. You can add the optional surround speakers and make it a surround sound, because it's very front heavy. It has no built-in DSP for surround modes or anything like that work without the rear speakers. It is wide in terms of speaker dispersion. It's got wide dispersion tweeters, which does work, so you don't have to be sat right in the sweet spot, as it were. You can set off axis a little bit and still get the stereo effect. It has a center speaker, so it has 6 drivers, 3 tweeters, and 9 amplifiers altogether. So each driver has its own amplifier, which is great. It has distortion cancelling technology in there, which does work. I mean, Samsung really have upped the game in terms of their audio products, and not surprising, because they've been buying an awful lot of audio companies recently, and obviously they'll be nitpicking and taking the best of the technologies and adding it to their stuff. But they've also got their own audio labs now in California, Steve, which they've been making a big thing about, and we're starting to see the benefits of that in products like this, because it's a big company, Samsung, and you don't necessarily think of audio performance when it comes to them, but they are competing with the likes of Q Acoustics and other well-known hi-fi brands when it comes to sound quality these days, because they're actually putting a hell of a lot of money into the research and development, and then putting that into the products that they have. And you've seen quite a few of these Samsung soundbars over the last 12 months.
Yeah, I have. In fact, I reviewed the MS6500, which is identical to the one you've just reviewed, except it's curved. And I've got to say, I think their investment in terms of both the audio labs in LA and also buying various companies. I saw actually, I a press release just recently, I think it was last week, for Harman, and it said Harman, a Samsung company now. So it's yes, they clearly publicly stated they want to move into the audio sector more. They put the money where their mouth is, literally, and both in terms of research and development, and in terms of investment, and in terms of buying various audio companies. I think they've made strong inroads, and it's showing in their products, because there's definitely been a gradual improvement in sound quality on their soundbars over the last 3-4 years as I've been reviewing them. And I have to say that I thought, in terms of performance and build quality and features, I couldn't fault the MS650.
Yeah.
I thought it was a really good sounding soundbar. The only area where I would fault it, and I'm sure you're going to come onto this now, is in terms of its pricing.
Yeah, I think Samsung this year, the products are great, as they always are, but the pricing's just it's a misstep this year. This soundbar was £599 when it got delivered to me. I don't know, maybe Samsung were listening into our Skype conversation, Steve, when we were discussing pricing.
Yeah.
because the day after our conversation it fell by £100 on their online shop, so it's now £499, but it's still, I think, just a little bit toppy for what you're actually getting. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's a great product, it's well built, it's got a nice metal top to it, which are brushed metal effects, so it's actually metal, it's not plastic made to look like that. It's really discreet. It fits well with their TVs. They've even designed a mount where if you're using a Samsung TV, you use and you're going to wall mount it. You use the Visa mounts, and you add this extra mount, which then mounts the soundbar underneath the TV, without having to drill extra holes and wall mount the soundbar. So you can mount it all as one unit, which I think is a great idea. Like I say, the app's fantastic. It does everything really well, and it sounds really good. And I thought we don't need a subwoofer marketing line was like, yeah, whatever. But actually, given the constraints of the size of the unit and the power that it has and what it's trying to do, it does have a genuinely very nice bass response and a lovely mid-range to it as well. I mean, voices and so on.
Is that going to be then the future for soundbars? To get rid of, the next thing to go will be the wireless sub?
No, it's just another option, another choice for the consumer, because Samsung's top-end models, I think they call them H2 models, which are more immersive and all the rest of it, they still have subwoofers, wireless subwoofers, and even the model next to this one, I think it's the MS550, it comes with a subwoofer, but it doesn't have some of the special features that this soundbar has. So that there is a distinction between the products when you look at the product lineup. Like Steve was saying, the 6500 is curved, whereas the 650 is a straight. So they're giving you choice there as well in terms of design. Both products identical in terms of the materials and stuff used. It's just one's slightly curved and one's straight. So yeah, I mean, great products, but overpriced.
If you've got a Samsung TV, Phil, it actually does complement it very nice, doesn't it? Because I reviewed it with the Q8, which is curved, and the curved MS650. It matched the TV beautifully, and obviously it had various features that you could employ when you've got a Samsung TV that are quite handy as well. Yeah,
that's what I found. I found it because I was using it with a Samsung TV. All the features worked. Because the features that it needed the TV for and all the rest of it, it just did it. And with certain Samsung models as well, you can get rid of all the wires if you want to, so you could wirelessly connect the soundbar to the TV. So you didn't need to have your HDMI cables or anything else connected, you could just connect it wirelessly. So you didn't need your HDMI ARC for that with certain mid to high end Samsung, which again is a really nice touch if you want to get rid of the wires and all the rest of it. So as a lifestyle product, really good. I think it would work best with a Samsung TV, but if you are buying a Samsung TV, then there's no harm asking a retailer to do you a deal, or even shove it in as part of the deal with your TV, because these soundbars, they really are a big step up on the speakers that are built into the TVs. Yeah. And I mean, the KS9500, that was the top end model for 2016, and just switching the soundbar off and going back to the speakers built into the TV is a comparison, night and day difference. I mean, it was so tinny and hollow when you listen to it through the TV speakers compared to what the soundbar was capable of. So yeah, it would have been a highly recommended if the pricing was a bit better in terms of matching the competition, because it's a shed load of competition in the market. I just felt it was a little bit overpriced, and with Samsung products this year, there seems to be a misstep there, I think, in terms of pricing, because we had the same issue with their UHD
Blu-ray player.
Yeah.
And they dropped the price on that. Actually, they dropped the price on that directly in response to us feeding back to them. This is a good player, but it's way too expensive because it was way off the rest of the competition. The TVs, I have to say, the QLED TVs have been, I think, very expensive and compared to the competition. And you've also seen some really, really aggressive price reductions from certain manufacturers. And I think you hear particularly about LG, who I noticed that just yesterday dropped the price on the player that I've just reviewed quite significantly. There's been some massive reductions in terms of the OLED pricing. I mean, we're doing the OLED comparison this week, looking at the prices of the TVs compared to when I actually reviewed them. You can get I think we mentioned on last week's podcast, you can get the 65-inch B7 for $2,999 right now, which is incredible. And the 55-inch mark is now less than $2,000.
I know. Don't. After you've bought a TV, never pay attention to the prices. Just look away.
Heartbreaking.
It would be lovely if I could have some kind of like an ad block for my TV, so no kind of electrical store products came up during the ads.
Yeah, I mean, it's just one of them things, isn't it? It's an early adopter. If you want in there early, you're going to pay for it, unfortunately. But it's the same with everything. It's the way the market works, isn't it? Right, so yeah, recommended on the Samsung soundbar. Let's move on, Mark. Gamescom?
Yep. This kind of the European, I guess you could say, answer to E3, but it's the kind of European big games trade show and open to the public as well, running in August in Germany. Not a great deal of news. It's been very much a case of a few announcements and that kind of thing, but Sony don't really seem to hit it. I guess the big thing from a hardware point of view has been it's like Microsoft's last chance to kind of make a big push for the Xbox One X before its release in November. And the news is it's kind of been a bit of a damp squib. It seems very much like their chance to kind of build momentum by getting a lot of games out there has been slightly faltering thus far, with the fact that it seemed that everyone was expecting Crackdown 3 to be the big game that would be released as a proper Microsoft exclusive alongside the console. And in the days running up to Gamescom, we heard that that's going to be pushed back till early 2018. So, nobody really knows whether it'll even hit that. You've got Sea of Thieves, the same, Rare's big kind of pirate sim, social pirate sim. Again, that'll be coming out a bit later. So it's very much a case of them putting out updates and the like for titles. However, if you want the most powerful console, then it seems like they will likely have the trump card over the PlayStation 4 Pro. All that horsepower. They showed off Rise of the Tomb Raider, and where the PS4 Pro used checkerboard rendering on the Xbox One X, it's going to be native 4K. Again, everything looks like it's very much that upgrade. The question is whether the price is going to be worth it to people. And it should also have a Dolby Atmos support, but it's not yet known whether that's going to be just something coming out in an update, and that will apply to PlayStation 4 Pro as well. With regards
to games, sorry, Mark, is that for games Dolby Atmos support?
Yeah, yes. That's no, sorry, that's not. I'm not talking about the Xbox One X specifically there, but with regards Rise of the Tomb Raider.
All right,
so
okay.
That game is going to have Dolby Atmos support, which that's a kind of big thing, because it seemed not too long ago that we were talking about the fact that a game might come out with HDR was something very much out of the ordinary, and that's built momentum very quickly. With regards games, a few interesting things. Jurassic World Evolution, a kind of theme park style sim in the Jurassic Park world. That's only slated for summer 2018, and it seemed to be a kind of a CG trailer. But as a format, as an idea for a game, between the source material and the genre, it seems like something that you'd think would have been big beforehand. But obviously with is it Fallen Kingdom, the next film? It's going to be summer 2018, so it's assumed that will be some kind of a tie-in. Also, a Final Fantasy 15 Pocket Edition piqued my interest, purely because they've made a kind of cutesy little simplistic art style remake of Final Fantasy 15 as episodic for mobile devices with touch controls, which again, very interesting. So you see the way that, should we say, the games industry is slowly kind of moving towards that, even with the big established studios. They want a bit of that mobile money. Other than that, with regards to Nintendo, Skyrim on Switch seems to look quite good. They showed it off in mobile mode, though there's some questions as to whether it was fully running in mobile mode. Looks like it's going to be a locked 30 frames a second at 720p, which is the native resolution of the screen. And so, yeah, it seems like very much business as usual. No great upsets, no kind of massive bombs dropped. Other than that, yeah, some interesting things.
So have you got your pre-order in for the X?
No, I'm not.
Hodge has.
Yeah, Hodge has, hasn't he?
Yeah, Hodge is falling for it.
Well, see, I can see that, because if you're less interested by the kind of Sony exclusives and the kind of games that they tend to put out from their first-party studios, then the fact that it's the most powerful console, the fact that it's got the UHD Blu-ray drive in it, it makes sense for a lot of people. I mean, even though I wasn't overly impressed with what was shown off at Gamescom with regards to it, pre-orders have been selling out. At time that we're recording this, I think there's only 1 or 2 places left for online orders in the UK, and for a console that's coming out mid-generation that seems to have no outright console exclusives to just itself, so you could still play them across other Microsoft platforms, coming out at £449, that's a pretty big deal that they've actually managed to sell their allocations.
Yeah, no, interesting stuff, and it'll be interesting to see what the feedback is once these consoles are into people's hands and they've had time to spend with them and so on, and see where things are with that. Right, so thanks very much for that, Mark. And let's move to Ed, because we haven't had his dulcet tones for about 10 minutes now.
That's fine. I've been just tapping away on
we were talking about, obviously, cassette players earlier on, and if we move on from the hi-fi separate system to portable, obviously Sony had a huge hit with the Walkman, the original Walkman back in the 80s, and then we had MP3 players come out late 90s, and then obviously we had Apple, who reinvented the MP3 player into the iPod, which was a jump ahead in terms of usability and flexibility and storage space, and the whole ecosystem that was around that, with iTunes and all the rest of it. I mean, you either loved it or hated it, but you've got to hand it to Apple. They had a great marketing angle there for the technology, and it took off, and people went down that route. But there seems to be a thing now where portable music players are just dying a death, and that's really coming down to how we use our mobile phones these days and smartphones. So is there a future for these portable music players that are only just portable music players, like the iPods?
Well, this is where I thought I would throw it open to the people that listen to this podcast. If you haven't been put off by all of our tape deck conversations, this was prompted by the news a little while ago now, a couple of weeks, that Apple has formally ended production of the iPod Shuffle and the iPod Nano, which means the only device left with the word iPod in it is the iPod Touch, which, as we know, is essentially a training wheels iPhone. It's not simply an audio player. In the ensuing weeks, for another client, I have been doing a test of dedicated portable audio players from other brands. And actually, the brand involved is not important, because as I was sort of conversing with Steve whilst we were getting the running order together, I would count myself as, a fully paid up audio lunatic. I've got big racks of kit and all the rest of it. And even I just found myself going, I'm not 100% sure I see the point in them anymore. I'm just, I've been tinkering around with 6 of them, and there's the uncomfortable realization that as flash memory has got cheaper, so the capacity of our phones has improved, and DAC manufacturers have realized that if you include on-the-go functionality in their products, they can head off the performance aspect. I'm left feeling that these are homeless products. This is not something which looks likely to sort of even really enjoy a sort of fringe interest or sort of specialist product point. I honestly am left wondering if Apple's evacuate or sort of exiting from it means really we are pretty much done on portable audio players. I mean, obviously, Phil, you've been walking around with considerable enthusiasm these last sort of 2 months or so, and at any stage have you thought, do you know what, having a dedicated audio player would improve this over me simply sticking a pair of earphones into my phone?
No. Yeah, so I've been walking around, obviously, with earphones plugged into my iPhone, streaming Tidal and Spotify because we've got a decent 4G signal around here. And the only time it's caught me out was when I got on the plane to fly down to the Philips event earlier in the month, and I got on the plane, plugged my earphones into my phone, and then realised that, I can't stream on the plane yet, and that's the only hurdle to it. And I hadn't offlined anything because I'd gotten so used to streaming it to my phone that I hadn't offlined anything and saved it to the phone. So I was kind of stumped for that hour's flight where I couldn't listen to anything. But no, yeah. I have no desire or need for a portable media player. I have an iPod and it's sat in my drawer, and it's been sat in my drawer for 24 months now. It's never been charged up again.
Me too.
See, I bought one recently, so I'm kind of coming at it from the other perspective. Ed, you sold me on the Audio Quest Dragonfly, and I loaded up my phone with everything, but I still find the weight of a phone the major drawback, and I still think there's a niche market there for portable audio players. I went out and bought one and bought a little 128 gigabyte card because I mean, as much as you say that there's flash memory and the memory in phones is getting larger, you're also seeing the fact that Apple still don't do expandable memory. Haven't Samsung changed with the latest S phone and taken it out? So there's the kind of potential there that you're in fact getting less functionality from some modern phones, and then you have the problem that going forwards, it's fine that your phone can do all of these things. However, screen resolution has kind of outstripped the progress in battery technology as well. And so, when I was looking at how much power would be drawn from this little kind of, portable DAC, what I found was the fact that, the better the phone, the better the screen, sooner or later, something's got to give with regards to the amount of power that it's drawing and how much play you can get from it.
So what you needed really was a Nokia 3210.
Yeah, exactly. I think I've probably still got one sat in a drawer somewhere.
I have, it's next to me.
Yeah.
They like PE teachers and cockroaches. They tend to survive everything, but it is an odd one because I mean, obviously there are the wherewithal, and there are files now commercially available which are very large. And yes, I take on board what you're saying about actually expandable support is something which is comparatively rare, but equally getting material on and off these devices I don't find to be terribly difficult anymore. So you can it's not too difficult to load up for a day and come back, and then the following day choose something else to take with you. And if you really think, oh God, I need to listen to something right this minute, as Phil says, provided that your data allowance is up to the job, you can just bring it down via a streaming service.
Yeah, I mean, it's so cheap data now on terms of... They're having to shift smartphones at the minute. I don't know if you saw, Carphone Warehouse, Dixon's group, lost 30% of their value yesterday or the day before because they gave the profit warning because they can't sell as many phones as they want to sell because they're getting so expensive now, and they all look the same and they all have the same functionality. Yet to upgrade your phone nowadays, the latest Samsung, it was announced the other day, it's £800 and something. The new iPhone is likely going to be over £1,000. Because you've got the low value of the pound making an effect as well. So what you're tending to find now is that people who do buy the phones, and I fit into this category, keep them for 3 or 4 years before they upgrading them again. And if everybody's doing that, then you can see why the value is just being wiped off Dixon's car phone the way it has this week, because people are just not investing in new phones and so on. So the data plans now and the SIM-free plans, because people are holding on, that's where they're having to make their money. And data is dirt cheap now. I mean, I think it's £24 a month I pay. I get 25 gig of data. I don't even get down to 20. I usually have 20 still remaining at the end of the month. Data is just so cheap at the minute. So it makes sense, certainly to me, to carry a mobile phone and stream, because again, 3G and 4G data, I can only think of the Western Highlands where I couldn't use it.
Yeah, I mean, there are some partial exceptions. I mean, some time ago I tested a Pioneer audio player for AVForums, and because that ran a full Android interface, it meant it could use the streaming services as well, and actually, because it would anything that was available from the Play Store, with some weird exceptions. I couldn't use it to run the Osmo cameras, for example, but it can run the control apps for various streamers and things. It ends up being a sort of surrogate remote control, which was that sort of gave it a niche, which I appreciated. But for the most part, I have to say I've been using these players that turned up for this test, and most of the time, the interfaces, you just find yourself going, blimey.
Yeah.
You know, because even bog standard Android on my incredibly budget phone that I've been using for the last couple of months whilst I work out what I'm going to do, it still knocks all of them into a cocked hat. And it's one of those things where I think this is a category where it would be perfectly possible to build an astounding product if the desire was there, but I'm sort of at the point where I'm not 100% sure that the desire is there anymore.
No, I think it's an incredibly niche product nowadays, for people who actually want to have the storage and stuff on there so they can listen to it straight away rather than streaming services. And if you're like me, you've probably got, I don't know about you, Ed, but I know, I've got at least 2 subscriptions, Tidal and Spotify. So and most people will be like that, and most people that I see out walking, they've all got mobile phones, with their earphones plugged in, and they're all doing their own thing, whether it's podcasts or music or whatever. So yeah, it makes that older technology redundant in my eyes, and I think a lot of people.
The other area which I think is also putting the squeeze on is a lot of us are using phones and so on and so forth as music source in car, because it just connects over Bluetooth. Now, audio manufacturers have fitted the personal audio players with Bluetooth, and that's great. They'll pair with the car just as well. But you can't then, if your phone rings, it's then not accessible to hands-free. You fall foul of the law and all sorts of things. If your phone rings, it's not actually on the car system.
Yeah, got you.
So you'd have to turn it down manually.
No, I mean, but you wouldn't be able to take the call if you were driving.
You would have to pick the phone up, which is illegal now. You can't even hold your phone in your hand now with the engine running. It's now, I think it's 6 points now on your license. So you can't even pick your phone up nowadays in a car if the engine's running and you're the driver. So what Ed's saying is absolutely bang on. You're going to have to miss the call if you're using a portable media player. Which again points to the smartphone being the answer, and stuff like Android Auto and Apple CarPlay, which are only going to get better and bigger as we go forward. I couldn't survive without it.
Can you not just have the phone in like a little holder and you get the little headsets that people touch or whatever?
Well, you can, but it just requires more guff on your dashboard.
Yeah, exactly. It's more guffy. Yeah, whereas it's all in one in a smartphone. Even if it's just Bluetooth to the car headset, to the car head unit, it still interrupts when the call comes through, and the call would be hands-free.
But as I say, it's one of those ones. I'm interested in people's feedback. I want to know if there's anyone out there that's still keenly using a dedicated personal audio player, whether you violently disagree with me. I mean, part of this feeds back into the fact that periodically, both Phil and I get pitches from manufacturers about their portable audio players, and we've essentially held off from reviewing them because we're not 100% sure if there's any sort of remaining interest for it, and we just like to know to an extent. get some feedback.
Yeah, so if you've got views on that, then add it to the podcast thread in the podcast forum on avforums.com. Head over there if you're listening on iTunes or somewhere that's not connected to the website. Head over to avforums.com. Podcast section is in AVForums resources in the forums, and click on that, click on the latest one, and add your comments. We'd be glad to hear them. So that's hardware news for this week. Movie news is next. Okay, so moving on to movie news, and I have not been able to get to the cinema this week, and actually after reading the reviews of The Dark Tower, I decided I could probably do without seeing that one, because there's 3 films out at the minute that I really want to see, which is Logan's Luck, what was the other ones? The one with Tom
Lucky, Detroit,
and
American Made,
which we discussed last week. I still got to see those. I'm probably going to spend Bank Holiday Monday at the cinema. I'm going to do what you do, Steve, and go to the cinema all day and get them all in. I think that's what I'm going to do, because I'm then Terminator the next again day, Terminator 2, on Judgment Day, 29th August.
Well, yeah, 1997.
20 years late. But,
yeah, but as we found out in the film, it still happens. It just pushes it back every time they change the timeline.
Of course it does.
Anyway, The Dark Tower, was it shit, Steve?
Yeah, it was very poor. I'm not entirely sure who this film was aimed at, really, because if you're a fan of the books, you're going to find it bitterly disappointing. And if you know nothing about the books, it's just a boring, generic film. The only good thing I can say about this film is it was 95 minutes long. So get in. That's amazing. A 95-minute movie based on a 7-series books that are all really big, thick tomes. How they managed to do that is beyond me.
Well, I think Kaz hit the nail on the head in his review, in his byline, which was, why did they not just make a TV series?
It would have been if they'd done it as a TV series with someone like HBO, it would have been amazing, because then you could have really taken your time, really got into detail of the world that King's created in the books. And also the book, there's swearing and violence in the books, and this is all toned down PG-13 movie. It was just, I'm not kidding, I actually fell asleep twice. Because it was just so generic and boring and unimaginative.
Was it that, or was it the old age that you fell asleep?
Possibly. But given how much imagination is crammed into the books, to create something so bland and boring, and also to do it with 2 great actors in the case of Idris Elba and Matthew McConaughey, both of whom do their best with very limited material. The strange thing is that the books, the main character in the books is the gunslinger, which is Roland Deschain, played by Idris Elba in the film. But in the film, the main character is a side character in the books called Jake, as a young boy, and it's sort of seen from his perspective. And then so Roland becomes a secondary character in his own story, which I think was a mistake in itself. It just felt, and also when you watch the movie, it feels like, what it really feels like is a pilot film for a TV series, bizarrely, given Kaz's comments, and I agree with Kaz. You watch this film, it feels like a pilot, and you think, okay, now let's get on with the series. And of course, there is no series, and I don't think there'll be any more films either, because it hasn't done very well at all, and it's been very badly received. There are still plans to do a TV series of some sort, so hopefully, at some point, they'll do it properly as a TV series.
Well, it sounds to me like it has the kind of scale and gravitas that Game of Thrones has. You could really build it that way and have a really cinematic. It doesn't need to run for 7 or 8 series, but you could have something really cinematic and tell the stories that obviously are contained within the works over maybe 4 or 5 seasons. Even if it's just 7 or 8 episodes per season, but it's cinematic and everything's up there on the screen to see. And it takes its time and tells the story properly, rather than trying to fit everything into 90 minutes or 95 minutes.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it would lend itself to that, because the books are, as King himself said, his idea was to take the good, the bad, and the ugly and mix it with Lord of the Rings, and that sounds strange, but it does work. But that sense of epic sweep and scale and it's very cinematic in terms of the books themselves. When you're reading them, you can imagine it on screen, and you've got these kind of very iconic characters. That and also he uses this is his magnum opus. The books, the Dark Tower books, actually intersect with all of his other work. So it's and they do actually, and in the film you do notice like a kid's got a car that's like Christine. There's 2 twins going, will you play with us? There's lots of little references to his other books and films in this film, but it just felt like there's so much potential there. You can't do it in one film or even a series of films, I think, the best thing to do would be to find a network that's prepared to invest the money, because it's going to cost, and also allow them to do it in a fairly adult tone. And as you say, with like they did with Game of Thrones. I mean, if you look at Game of Thrones, HBO has taken the books and provided the budget to deliver them. You know, it's because they're one of the few TV series I can think of where I would have, I almost always watch it on the big screen in the home cinema, because it's so cinematic. The production values are there, the effects are cinema quality. And you can genuinely do that. And so they've given them the money, they've given them the production budget and the facilities to make this series properly. They've allowed them to be adult in their tone, and they've followed the books relatively closely, although obviously they've deviated in recent years because the books aren't finished yet. But, if they could do something like that with the Dark Tower series, I think it could be great. But the film itself is bitterly disappointing. Don't bother.
Okay, don't bother with that one. So films opening this Friday. So I've already mentioned one of them. It's only playing one evening, which is the 29th, and that's Terminator 2 in 3D. It's back again. I noticed that my local Odeon, they only had one screen shown when I booked my tickets, and it was almost full when I picked my seating for that evening. They've added some extra screens, some extra showings for it. It seems to be popular, and I guess thinking back to it, I mean, I can remember going to the cinema originally to watch it on its original theatrical run and being absolutely blown away by it, but it's never come back to the big screen since then. So this is your opportunity to see it on the big screen. And there have been some slight changes made, and I know the colour timing's probably the one that I'm going to dislike the most. But I'm still, hyped up to see it on the big screen again. I think it'll be great.
Yeah, I just wish they would give you the option of a 2D or 3D screening, because I would like to. I was going to go, and I thought, no, I don't want to see it in 3D. I would probably have gone if it had been a 2D screening, because like you say, I haven't seen it at the cinema since 1991. When it was first at the cinema, and it would be quite nice to see it with an audience on a big screen again. I can't believe that how long ago that was that we saw the film at the cinema, and but I think there's a whole generation of people that will be going to see it who've never seen the film either properly, certainly never seen it projected. So that would be interesting. But I would have preferred a 2D option if it was available.
You really surprised me, Steve, because going back 2 years ago, probably even less than that, you were like, "Oh, 3D's great, 3D's brilliant."
But it's not a 3D movie, is it? It's been post-converted. I know Cameron's been talking about it, taking their time, have done it well, but it was never intended for 3D. It was never shot with 3D cameras. And
I would rather just see there is that, but you got to say that Titanic, though, when they did the 3D version of that, it actually wasn't too bad. It was actually very watchable. It's
hardly a ringing endorsement. It wasn't too bad.
But for a 3D conversion, I mean, so it wasn't bad. It was actually really quite well done.
I wonder what aspect ratio it'll be, because the Titanic conversion was actually 1.85 to 1, wasn't it? They opened it out because it was shot on Super 35. They opened out the frame for the 3D conversion. I wonder if they'll. Hope not.
Well, again, Terminator 2 was shot Super 35. There's a big thing on the LaserDisc showing you how he composed it for 240 to 1, but at the same time composed it open frame as well, open format.
Is that
one eye on? Sorry.
Is that why Robert Patrick's bollocks was seen?
I don't know.
Composed in that aspect ratio.
I can't answer that one. I wasn't there. I don't know. But yeah, I mean, it's interesting that we'll go into this because it ties in with what we're talking about right now. So he has made changes, Steve, but it's not like George Lucas type of changes, is it? It's more subtle. Like we say, the colour timing has been changed, which I'm not sure whether I'm going to like, because I really liked how it looked originally, certainly on LaserDisc and then on DVD and Blu-ray, with the nice blues in the black scenes and the night scenes. It had that really nice blue cyan hue to it. So I hope he hasn't changed it too much. But other changes are just subtle little things to correct little mistakes that were in there. He hasn't done anything major like added a new animated character or anything.
No, basically, for those who are familiar with the film, if you watch it, when the truck first jumps down into the drainage ditches in the LA chase scene, when the truck does the stunt, the window falls out, and then later on you see Robert Patrick pushing the window out, and that's always bugged Cameron. So what he did was they just changed it so that when it does the stunt now, the window doesn't fall out, and then obviously later on you see Robert Patrick push it out. So that's fine. It's a minor change. He would have done it, as you said. I would have done that at the time if I'd had the capability to do that. And also the stuntman who's riding the big bike when does the stunt when he jumps into the drainage ditch. It's quite obviously a stuntman wearing a Schwarzenegger mask, and now they've just subtly put Schwarzenegger's face in so that it's actually Schwarzenegger looks like a Schwarzenegger on the bike. Again, he said I would have done that if I could have at the time. So that's fair enough. Yeah, my biggest problem is going to be if they've radically changed the color timing, because like you, I really like the look of the film as it was originally done. And I can understand why he might have had to change it for 3D, because obviously they need to increase the brightness to allow for the effect of the glasses. But I'm hoping the 2D version retains some of that look at least. Although, again, maybe things like an HDR pass has changed. I mean, we'll have to see what happens when the discs come out. Yeah. Or when you see it at cinema next week, you can tell us what you think. But
at the end of the day, if James Cameron's done it and he's the director, then,
true, I suppose it's his call.
Who are we to argue with James Cameron? Right, so anyway, let's get back. So Terminator 2, it's out for the one evening. If you can find a screen, if you can find a seat, then I would certainly go and see it if I was you. If you can do that, because like I say, you're never going to see it on the big screen again, or not likely to see it on the big screen again within the next 10 years anyway, at least I think. Anyway, what else is coming out?
The other film coming out is the Limehouse Golem, which it's a pretty quiet week, I have to say, release-wise. It's a small-scale production about a killer in Victorian London, starring Bill Nighy. I know very little about it other than having seen the trailer at the cinema, although it does look quite interesting. So that's the only other film really coming out this week. It's a pretty quiet week, I suppose, after a massive films out last week.
Yeah, there's still to catch up with those ones. So
yeah,
that's
they're going to have a lot of stuff still running over. So
yeah, and you know, unbelievably, Dunkirk is still running at my local Odeon. 7 showings a day in IMAX. No, 6 showings a day in IMAX. It's really coining the business in at the minute.
Well, it's done boffo business in the UK, that's for certain. Understandably, I guess, given the subject matter. It's funny film how films perform internationally, because I was just looking at the box office numbers for various films and just seeing how Dunkirk was doing, actually, and I thought it's doing reasonably well. I mean, it's always going to struggle, I think, because the subject matter is not going to translate to a lot of other countries in the way it will in this country. But I suddenly thought, bloody hell, in the top 10 films internationally, there's a film called Wolf Warrior 2, which has made $780 million. It's like it's like the fifth most successful film of the year so far. I've never heard of it.
No.
It made $780 million in China.
Yeah,
that's staggering. It's the second most successful film outside of the United States after The Fast and the Furious. And you're thinking that is a serious market now, isn't it? If you can put in those kind of numbers in a single country, you understand why US film studios are just pandering to the Chinese market as much as they are these days.
Totally. But staying on the Dunkirk theme, it has been nice to see such a range of people at the cinema when I've been, walking in and coming out again. The types of people that you don't normally see going to the cinema. So it has been drawing people in.
Older generation, basically. Again,
totally. Totally. Right. So let's move on. Blu-rays. People still buying Blu-rays?
Not unless I absolutely have to.
No. I think Blu-ray still. I mean, DVD still. I mean, it's interesting. We were talking about the competitions at the beginning, saying retro DVD release. That film's only available on DVD or digital download. So DVD's still quite popular, and obviously Blu-ray remains popular to a degree. But as for this week, not a classic week, has to be said. You've got Unlocked, thriller starring Orlando Bloom and Naomi Rapace, which got mediocre reviews when it came out and looks like a very generic thriller. We've got Batman and Harley Quinn, which is the competition prize, which is an animated, one of Warner's animated features, Batman features, introducing, it's basically celebrating Harley Quinn, who was introduced in the animated series, actually, originally. And that's coming out this week. And we've also got Silver Dream Racer. For those of you of a certain vintage like me, you could probably remember this film from the cinema in 1980 with David Essex in the lead and a young Beau Bridges playing the American sort of rival.
I've never been more delighted to say that no, I don't have the faintest idea what you're talking about.
Yeah.
It's about motorbike racing. It was never a classic, in all fairness, and David Essex was never a great actor. But anyway, that's coming out if you fancy a bit of nostalgia. And also there's season 3 of Gotham, which is actually a pretty good series from Warner's TV department. So
Okay, cool. Anything on the Ultra HD Blu-ray front?
Well, there haven't been any big new releases announced, but there's been some clarification on a couple of things, so it's probably worth pointing out. First of all, Blade Runner has now got a UK release date, so it had been announced for the US. It's coming out in the UK on the 25th of September. Also, on the day after, on 26th of September, in the States at least, Transformers comes out on Ultra HD. I forgot to mention last week, it'll be Paramount's first Dolby Vision release, so that's their first DV release. And then we've also got, I think it's not been officially announced yet, but it looks like Baby Driver is going to be arriving on the 7th, around the 7th of November, on Ultra HD Blu-ray. And also Serenity and Apollo 13 are confirmed for the 17th of October, at least in the States.
Just been looking at prices, Steve, of the Ultra HD Blu-rays. I think it's still the big stumbling block for the format at the moment. So like I said, last week or the week before, I had a chance to walk through HMV and have a look at what the prices were. The average price is 25 quid. The average price in Tesco's at the minute is 25 quid as well, locally. To me, that's still a hell of a lot of money for software. In
comparison to the price of the players that have dropped, it still seems to have stayed quite high.
Yeah, it is strange, because I thought the prices were certainly starting to move down towards, certainly, within a few pounds of the Blu-ray releases, but it seems to have gone the other way. I mean, there was a time where they all kind of dropped to about 19 quid, 20 quid, but they've gone straight back up to 25, and you've got to say, well, why is that? Is it just that they're not selling, so they would rather charge more for the few that they are going to sell?
Possibly.
I mean, to show you how things are as well in terms of releases and all the rest of it, I'm looking at the US releases, and I am putting money aside every month for a visit to Fry's. Now, we've been going together to CES since 2011. So how many years is that, Steve? That's 6 years?
This will be our seventh year, I think.
Seventh year, right?
Yeah.
So 7th year going to Fry's, and then within those 6 years, anyway, I have not bought anything at Fry's. You've always been the one that splurged your cash. I've always been the sensible one and not bothered. This year I think I'll be spending several $100s on software while I'm out there, because if you look at certainly the sites that are importing the American releases at the minute, the prices are all on the rise as we speak.
They've definitely gone up. Wow HD, which is the one I generally use, has increased its, I'd say on average about £5 across the board. Seems to have been, like, for example, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, if you order it from them, is 35 quid. Now, before, I think it would have been more like about 30 for a new release like that. And I'm not sure whether that's reflecting whether they've got to pay more import duties now, because I heard some stories about that being the case, or whether they just realise that there's such a big difference in release dates between UK and US discs at the moment that they can, charge more and still get the money because people are going to buy them to get them earlier. So what's
the kind of average price for like shipping from the States? Because I've been looking at some other things unrelated to AV, and it seems like shipping recently has just gone up ridiculously.
Yeah, it has. I got caught out. I bought black badges for the Mustang, so the black horse at the front and the 250 side badges in black. It's $50 to buy them from a company in the States, but by the time they come through UK, hitway import taxes and so on, and then the one that really gets me, there was a £30 handling fee from UPS. So it ended up costing £100 for 3 black badges to go in the car. So important stuff at the minute. Unless Brexit's a success and we get a fantastic trade deal with the US where they don't add duty or anything to stuff, I've stopped buying stuff now. I'll pick it up when I'm out there.
So I take it this year at CES you'll be taking 2 suitcases and one will be completely empty.
Yeah, basically that's like I say, I'm saving every month at the minute, so I've got at least a few $100s to spend on software and stuff that I really want. I'll pick it up when I'm out there, as well as some parts for the Mustang.
I'm inadvertently saving by not actually drinking or leaving the house. So we'll see how that goes. That's
the best savings plan ever, Ed.
How to save money? Break an appendage.
I honestly, this is being recorded. It is 11:15 on Friday. The last time I left the house was at 1:30 on the Monday.
I would just imagine it. Your eyes when you first do see sunlight again.
Oh well, I do open the curtains, Mark. It's not quite that bad. I haven't turned into Boo Radley But it's I am getting out of the house tomorrow because bless him, my dad is coming up. But I'm quite looking forward to that.
I was thinking,
but I have
like,
spent nothing this week.
I was thinking you kind of stepping out a bit like Bruce Campbell at the end of Evil Dead 2 or something. It's been too long.
Yes. It's weird, but no, I'm sort of with you. I mean, it's interesting to chart the cost of some of the vinyl releases are also it's weak pound more than anything else, and with some of them they are clearly priced because they know they have a finite quantity of them and people will buy them at a fairly hefty price point. So unfortunately, it's in many regards, despite being at the opposite ends of the scale technologically, there's a limited but enthusiastic client base for both formats, and the US steers a lot of the release timings and pricing, and our excitingly devalued currency just isn't up to the job at the minute.
Yep. Yeah, it is expensive. Right, okay. So to wrap up on the podcast, we were talking about Terminator 2, and one of the great LaserDisc releases back in the day, Steve, was the Terminator 2 box set. I can still remember it being delivered. That's how vivid it is, etched on my memory, because back in the day then, we did buy a lot of LaserDiscs, but it was a case of you had to save a couple of months, sometimes 6 months. Well, you were a banker, so you had plenty of money to blow on coke and all the rest of it, and LaserDiscs. But for us working class people, it took a few months to save to get, especially the Star Wars box set. I saved for a year for the definitive box set to be able to buy that. They were so expensive, but there was this.
How much was that box set?
It was about 250 quid, 300 quid.
Yeah, it was, wasn't it? It was.
Yeah, it was super expensive.
I paid 250 quid for it.
Yeah, it was super expensive. I mean, all the LaserDiscs. I mean, even just the bog standard Pioneer LaserDisc was 25-30 quid for the PAL version, and about 40 to 60 quid for the US version. And it was the days where there was this small but friendly community. It's how places like AVForums got started back in the day. It was because it was a small niche market, and people would. I mean, I used to buy the magazines religiously. I knew when the magazines were going to hit the stands, and the reason I was buying the magazines, and I'm talking about the likes of, there no longer exist stuff like Home Entertainment and What Video, Home Cinema Choice, which was just launched at that period, so it was only 2 or 3 issues in, and other magazines. And the reason I bought them was because in the back pages you had all the listings for people like Laser Enterprises and other places that imported the LaserDiscs into the UK, and then had all the listings in the back of the magazines. And that was the whole reason I bought the magazines, was latest LaserDisc player reviews and LaserDisc being listed in the back and knowing which ones I was going to buy. And it wasn't a case of you bought the magazine and then went and bought them. You added it to a list and you thought, right, well, that one's that much, so I could probably get that one in March, and I'm going to pick this one up. And that was the way that you collated your collection back in the day, because it was so expensive back then, and because it was, but as well, it was the best format that was out. It was the best pick. And looking back at it now, I mean, the sacrifices that we used to make for LaserDisc, Steve, you're probably worse than I was, because, like I say, I had very limited budgets. So the players that I bought, they were bought on finance, you know what I mean? So it's like, I'm going to buy this one, right? So that's going to take me 12 months to pay that one off and all the rest of it. But these were the sacrifices you made. You got up halfway through the film to turn the disc over. You wouldn't put up with that nowadays.
Well, I mean, it depends on what disc it was. If it was a CAV disc, you were getting up about 5 times.
Well, I was just coming on to that definitive Star Wars collection. There was so many discs per film that you got up 4 or 5 times during Empire Strikes Back to turn the discs over. You wouldn't put up with that now. And yes, later down the line, I think the CLD 925 was the last LaserDisc player I bought, which had the auto change, so it had the buffer where it would buffer the video and then start playing the other side, so it was seamless.
Ish. Because I had a 919, and I love the way that people used to complain about layer change on DVDs. I'm thinking, you know nothing.
Yeah, you know absolutely nothing. But the thing for me with LaserDisc, and this is what we're going to come on for, it was probably the most important format for film fans, because it was the first time ever that, because back in the days of VHS, you had PAL and NTSC, so unless you went out to the States and bought a VCR from the States and brought it back, but even then you'd have to buy a converter to convert it to PAL for you to be able to watch it on the TV. So there was never a collector's market for videotape in terms of cut films and films that you couldn't get through because the BBFC had banned them and that kind of thing. So what really made LaserDisc really important for the film fans was the fact that Pioneer started releasing PAL NTSC players, and TV manufacturers started putting in NTSC into the PAL TVs, or pseudo NTSC into the PAL TVs, so your TV could accept an NTSC signal and show it properly. And that small change made by Pioneer and made by certain TV manufacturers at the time just lit the fuse basically on an exploding market of stuff that you just couldn't get your hands on in this country. So if you were into video nasties and so on, you could get all of those, or the vast majority of those, on LaserDisc, and they would come with audio commentaries. They would come with behind the scenes stuff. They would come with extras discs. Criterion started up and releasing stuff and actually doing transfers. THX got involved and started the mastering process and making sure things were mastered. It was the first time that you got audio commentaries on stuff. So as a film collector, it was the format, and I think it was the format that then led on to DVD, because DVD could have came to market and just been the film on the disc, but I think because there was such a huge following with LaserDisc in terms of the film fans and certain studios making content available, and the fact that we had PAL and NTSC players in the UK with the audio commentaries and everything else, Steve, that's why DVD became the format it did, where those things became ordinary. You know, the audio commentaries and extras and all the rest of it. It was LaserDisc that kicked all that off.
Yeah, LaserDisc was massively important as a format. I know it wasn't hugely successful as a format in terms of mass market appeal, but from the point of view of influencing later formats like DVD, and from the point of view of film fans, it was an incredibly important format, because you're right. It's hard to think about it these days, and but going back to these pre-internet, pre-digital days, your access to US content before LaserDisc was, as you say, Phil, almost non-existent. I mean, it was very, very hard, because you'd have to have a US VHS deck, you'd have to have a TV. You just couldn't do it, pretty much. I think I just about in a sort of 93 had a tape deck that could play NTSC, and I could watch some American tapes. I did, but it was very hard and pretty much unheard of. LaserDisc changed all of that, and also, it not only gave you access to a whole vast catalogue of content you couldn't access before, both whether because it just wasn't available, or because the BBFC had banned or cut it in some way, but also, it gave you access to a wealth of additional content that you wasn't available before. I mean, if you think about VHS tapes, they were 4:3, and there was a slight, again in the early 90s, there was a move towards some tapes being letterbox, but most stuff wasn't available in its correct aspect ratio. At best you were going to get 2-channel stereo, or maybe a Dolby Surround, matrixed soundtrack from that 2-channel stereo mix. Quite often, frankly, the picture quality was appalling, not only just because it was VHS, but also because they used crappy old prints. It was full of, scratches and dirt and all kinds of stuff. I mean, no idea how bad it was. LaserDisc changed all that by, first of all, doing things in their correct aspect ratio. That was a big, big change. Then there was the sound quality. You were talking about digital sound. You were talking about at least, proper Dolby Surround, but then later on Dolby Digital and DTSX, so discrete surround channels. That was all pioneered, no pun intended, by LaserDisc. Then you had all the extras, commentary tracks, behind the scenes, deleted scenes, things that studios used to throw away in the past. Deleted scenes used to get chucked out. They were keeping this stuff for LaserDisc. And then, like you say, there was also the aspect of getting stuff uncut. For example, Terminator 2, which was cut in this country because the kneecapping scenes were were trimmed by the BBFC, apparently because they didn't want to offend people in Northern Ireland. The rat sequence in The Abyss, which again was cut in this country because BBFC said it was cruel on the rat.
Because we're a nation of animal lovers.
Yeah, quite. You got access to a vast catalogue of content. You got access to loads of extras and stuff, and all that stuff was pioneered by LaserDisc, and then of course it carried on into other formats later. But I remember that I had VHS tapes before I remember it clearly. It was 1994, and a guy at work told me about LaserDisc, and I was thinking, this sounds interesting. And he brought in the Terminator 2 box set and showed it to me at work. And I took one look at that and thought, I got to get into this in a big way. And that was the first one I bought, Terminator 2. And I bought a player, and then I took a day off work and just spent the whole day going through that entire box set. And it was brilliant. It was everything a film fan could want.
Yeah. And the other important thing that we're forgetting now, which was a big thing back in the days, because this was when films were released 6 months to 9 months ahead in the States to what the UK released. So we're still talking in the era where film prints were very much the thing. There was no digital projection, there was no digital distribution of film and all the rest of it. So there was no day and date releases at the cinema. We were always 6 to 9 months behind. But the thing was that by the time the film was coming to the cinema in the UK, the LaserDisc was out in the US. So as a collector, I remember I watched Speed at home before it was available even in the cinemas in the UK. And that was a big appeal of the format as well, was the fact that you had early access if you wanted it to these films, because, like I say, they were only just coming to the cinema in the UK when they were available to pick up on LaserDisc from the States, and that was a big draw for the format as well, which I think gave it a good shot in the arm. I think Pioneer did the biggest good with it because they introduced obviously the PAL NTSC angle with the players, and then pushed through their TVs and then other people's TVs the NTSC modes, so you could watch that content. But the other thing was the fact that you could buy the films so far ahead, and that's what got people interested in the format as well. And picture quality was just so far ahead back then. Even though it was a composite video, it was broadcast quality at that moment in time, which was a big appeal. So yeah, I mean, we think back to these things and with a modern angle to things, it shows you how far we have come just in 20 years.
Look on the bright side, you were both just fractionally too young to be briefly swayed. Have you heard of CED? I'm assuming from your stunned silence, probably not. Capacitance electronic disc.
No, I remember CDI. CDI was the precursor to DVD. So it was between LaserDisc and DVD, and it was terrible. I remember seeing a demo where I think it was one of the Star Trek films where it opens up and it's snowing at the beginning. So one where they're being sent to the
Star Trek 6.
Yeah, the prison, and it was just covered in macro blocking because obviously the snow was falling and the compression was just bloody awful. And I think it was MPEG 1.
MPEG 1.
Oh, it was awful. It really was.
Now this is, and I am not making this up, this is video vinyl capacitance electronic discs. It was a LaserDisc sized disc that was played by a physical contact stylus.
Yes, that was the early days of LaserDisc. So there was actually two formats. This was the other format.
Yeah.
And it wasn't called LaserDisc, it was called LaserVision.
Sometimes. No, they couldn't use laser. So it was a video disc. But yeah, because obviously there was no optical reader. It's a physical contact.
It was an actual stylus onto it.
Which meant that obviously each film you bought got worse the more you watched it, which I think is quite an achievement.
I'm trying to remember what Philips actually called it. It was DiscoVision, wasn't it? Was it DiscoVision or Magnavox? Was it Magnavox?
There's that. They had Video 2000 as well.
DiscoVisions, that's what it is. DiscoVisions, and Magnavox was somewhere along the lines there as well, before it then changed to LaserDisc. But yeah, CED was a big thing as well. But it almost brought RCA to its knees, if I remember right.
Yes. Well, that's I'm going to say, it amuses me, obviously, for you Star Wars completionists, that there is a version of the original trilogy on CED, and neither of you guys own it. So
there was the definitive edition, which we're banging around about the box set, but actually, I used to pop down to Manchester and Leeds now and again, because I lived in the borders back then, and there wasn't many shops, so you had to hunt out these places where you could go and find LaserDiscs. And so I used to go down as far as Manchester and Leeds, and I remember digging basically through stacks and stacks of LaserDiscs, and we found some really early Star Wars on LaserDisc. Didn't even have the stereo soundtrack, it was a mono soundtrack, and it was in 4:3, and it was bloody awful. There was print damage, there was all sorts. I mean, it looked terrible. So just getting back to your point, Steve, about the VHS releases, I mean, it wasn't just that on tape and on the early discs as well, where the transfers were really bad. Do you remember watching films on TV? You know, on ITV and the BBC, and how badly transferred they were, and there was hair in the gates and all sorts.
I mean, we talk about a lot, you know, sometimes I get a little bit angry when I see people moaning these days about disc releases and like, oh, look at this, look at that. It's like, you don't know you're born. You don't know you're born. You go back 20, 30 years. No, I mean, you go to the cinema, and it was a print that had been around America 6 times before it got to the UK. So as you said, Phil, we were getting the film 6 months or 8 months later in the US. The print was absolute shit.
Yes, and let me guess,
regional theatre.
And it was uphill both ways to the theatre and home, and they didn't have popcorn; they served coal.
Yeah,
I know.
Yeah, and you went out with a fiver, and you had a fish and chip supper, you had 3 pints of beer, and you still had £3 and change.
Yeah. No, seriously, you sit there, you know, it was in mono, the picture quality was terrible because the film print was knackered, and you're like, oh god. But then you got, you know, and obviously early in the days there was no home video, so you saw it at the cinema and that was it.
Yeah.
And then you got home video, and of course, like you say, Phil, you know, the studios didn't really care; they just wanted to get this stuff out. So quite often the prints they were using were terrible. The picture quality was appalling. Obviously, VHS was never great to start with.
You've been listening to the AV version of Monty Python's 3 Yorkshiremen sketch.
Yeah. You have.
When I got home, my father would murder us in our bed. But we were glad for it.
PC, I grew up with a.
Got better.
I grew up with a local cinema, like a total local flea plate. Like you say, I mean, you know, the biggest innovation they ever had was they actually got a silver screen installed. You know, it was mono sound. There was like one speaker behind the screen. It was terrible, and that was right up to the early 90s. And it wasn't until we used to venture out to, like I say, we used to do a bit of travelling just to get entertainment. And we went to, it was a brand new UCI cinema that had opened up, and they were showing Jurassic Park in DTS. And the first time I heard that at the cinema in a proper sound system blew me away then. And that was such a leap at the time. Do you remember Spectral Record? Dolby Spectral recording? I still remember that trailer. It was a plane going over a meadow, and then suddenly it got to the edge of a cliff, and then it was like a Grand Canyon type thing, and it came up with Dolby Spectral Recording. I mean, you think back to these things. I mean, that was a big thing when you went to the cinema. You had the trailer beforehand telling you what sound system it was on and all that kind of thing, like the DTS spinning disc and stuff, and you don't see any of that nowadays. It's a shame. Yeah. We're getting all nostalgic on the podcast here, folks.
Well, no, I'm not nostalgic really, because I don't want that again. I'm really glad what we've got now. What I'm saying is people who perhaps moan about what we've got now should take a serious think about what it used to be like, and think that we've now got digital projection, so you get a clean, perfect print every time. Okay, I admit that sometimes the cinemas bugger up the projection, but done properly, it looks amazing. It sounds amazing. We get it day and date with the US. Sometimes we get it before it even opens in the US.
But
and there's no degradation of image.
But you had to have all that before you could get to it, though, Steve. So that's what I meant by that's what I meant by nostalgic. It was a case of there was a bit of an event behind stuff as well, and it was like I say, I used to travel quite a distance to go and dig for LaserDiscs in piles of discs in shops and all that kind of thing. You don't do any of that now, so that's kind of why I was feeling a bit nostalgic about it.
I do miss my LaserDisc. I've got to say.
Unless you're a vinyl collector, you can still go and do a bit of digging. I really enjoyed that shop we went to in Vegas.
Crate digging is an unbridled joy.
That took me back 20 odd years. That did. I really enjoyed just flicking through stuff and having a look at vinyl and that kind of thing again, because it brought back memories. You know, this is what we used to do on a weekend. You used to go to the record shop and see what was new and dig through crates and that kind of thing and find new stuff that was maybe 20 years old, but it was new to you. You know what I mean? So. Yeah, we are spoilt for choice these days. Absolutely spoilt for choice. I agree with you, Steve. But then, you know, the quality standard nowadays. I mean, the local Odeon that I go to is, light years ahead of where we used to be. It's light years ahead of probably a lot of places still in the UK, cinema-wise, in terms of presentation, that kind of thing. It's amazing what we get now. It's absolutely fantastic.
I do kind of miss, though, the old days of terrible TV edits of films. You know, where you'd say something's not quite right here. You know, the days of muddy funsters and melon farmers. You know.
Yeah. Well, what was the line in Back to the Future with the TV version? Because he says when this sucker gets up to 88 miles an hour, you're going to see some serious shit. But the TV version is when this sucker gets up to 88 miles an hour, you're going to see some serious stuff.
Yeah.
Not just stuff, serious stuff. But this is yes. I mean, I sort of agree with you that without anyone, you know, without the mainstream paying any attention to it, it did set many of the precedents that ensured that more mainstream formats managed to be both accessible and appealing to the mainstream whilst delivering on things that keen film fans had come to expect. And yes, I think in many regards, because of the sheer cost of it and the relative fragility of both the discs and the early players, I mean, lots and lots of lessons. It's one of the reasons why DVD was so damn good. People just sat down and worked logically through all of the limitations of LaserDisc, whilst keeping some of the things it got entirely right.
Yeah, the thing is still makes me giggle nowadays thinking back to it, and we were big advocates of showing films in the correct aspect ratio. But if you think back to the days of LaserDisc, the biggest screen I ever had, and until I bought the rear projection set, was 32 inches. And watching Ben-Hur on LaserDisc at 255 to 1 on a 32-inch screen, it was just a tiny little slither.
I think Ben-Hur was 2.76 to 1. I think we were probably at about 200 lines of information there.
276 to 1. You're right. It was even wider than that. Yeah, and it's just this little slither across the. So thank God.
Staring at the world through a welding mask.
It was hilarious, but yeah, I mean that had to happen though for then things to push on for there, and thank God it did, because I mean nowadays we were talking about a 75-inch TV last week, Steve. This is where we've gotten to.
There I was watching a film in 4K on a 75-inch TV in HDR with the wide color gamut, 10-bit video depth, Dolby Atmos soundtrack, and you're like, bloody hell, we really have come on so far to the point now where the experience at home can equal it, and in some respects even exceed that of the cinema.
I mean, the only thing you can't do at home nowadays that you can do, but obviously does happen at the cinema, is this space that the film is shown in, and there's something about that big space and the sound in a big space like that, where and obviously 40 50 feet of screen. Even if you do set the same distance from it at home and all the rest of it, there's just something about the actual physical surroundings of the cinema that unless you're very rich and you can build your own at home to the same dimensions, that's the only thing you can't really replicate at home.
But there are people in it, Phil. Other people.
Well, if you go to early morning, if you go to the cinema that Steve goes to, or you go early morning, sometimes you're the only person in there.
I was going to say, actually, Ed, there were any people in the Dark Tower screening I was at last night.
Milton Keynes, I'm afraid. Milton Keynes. I mean, obviously, my wife has an unlimited pass. She goes a lot, and it would appear that thanks to the modern nature in which we all work in the city of the future, there are no times where you get empty screenings of anything in Milton Keynes. Regrettably, so I just don't go anywhere near it because there's other people there.
Okay, well, on that bombshell, that wraps up the AVForums podcast, the nostalgic AVForums podcast for this week. Christ, some people are going to be really turned off with us just reminiscing like
this.
The
nurses come round and steal my clothes.
Someone's going to listen to this randomly and think, AVForums technical podcast, and they're going to hear about cassette decks and LaserDisc and think, huh?
We are at the bleeding edge.
Yeah, absolutely. Cutting edge stuff.
But we didn't talk about vinyl very much. Although that actually now counts as a contemporary format, so we actually know.
There's no nostalgia there, Ed. It's still contemporary. What are you talking about?
Delivering bits. Yeah.
Anyway, my thanks to Steve Brothers.
We got Skynet by the balls now, don't we?
Ed Selley.
Come with me if you want to live.
And Mark Botwright.
I feel like I'm going to throw up.
I'll be back. Nobody said it. Don't forget, you can follow us on Twitter and Facebook, bookmark AVForums for latest reviews, news and video, and of course, why not leave the 5-star ratings on iTunes, but only if you enjoyed the show. I'm Phil Hinton, thank you very much for listening, and we'll see you next week for our IFA special.